Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear listeners. Welcome back to the Be Qur'an podcast, where we explore timeless truths through the lens of the Qur'an and uncover how divine guidance speaks to our everyday lives. I'm your host, Ali.
And I'm Fatima. In today's episode, we're diving into a question that challenges both the heart and the mind. Can we truly be good without religion?
We'll explore the source of moral values. Is it culture, conscience, society, or something greater? And does goodness have lasting meaning if it's not grounded in divine guidance?
We'll also look at how the Qur'an speaks to this question, what it says about fitra, moral responsibility, and why belief gives value and permanence to our actions.
If you've ever wrestled with the foundations of morality, or wondered why belief matters in a secular world, this episode is for you. Let's begin. Bismillah. We're getting into a really fundamental question today, aren't we? It's all about whether you actually, need religion to be a good person.
Yeah, and tied to that, what really gives our actions any kind of lasting value? It's a big one.
Absolutely. And the source material you brought us dives right in, looking at different ideas about where we get our sense of right and wrong.
Exactly. It makes a pretty strong claim about belief being necessary for actions to have, real weight.
So our mission here is to explore the source, pull out the core arguments, maybe uncover some things that make you think we're doing this deep dive just for you.
Let's get started. Then the source kicks off with this central idea, which is that beliefs are essentially what give value to what we do. Our actions derive their worth from our underlying beliefs.
Okay. Right away, that brings up a big challenge, which the source tackles head-on. What about people who don't hold specific religious beliefs? Like an atheist philanthropist, or someone pouring their life into charity work. These look like good deeds, right?
Definitely seem like it on the surface.
So, from this source's perspective, do those actions actually count? Do they have real value without that belief system?
That's precisely the question it forces us to confront. And the source says before we can even answer that, we need to ask something more basic, which is, what is it that gives value to any action? And maybe even more fundamentally, who or what gets to decide what's good and what's bad anyway?
Right. What's the standard we're using when we label something good?
Yeah. So the source looks at a couple of potential candidates for that standard. And while it finds them lacking, first up is this concept of fitra.
Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. The source describes it as our original, sort of uncontaminated conscience, our innate human nature.
Okay. Like an inner compass?
Exactly. And the source acknowledges, this fitra does generally point us towards right and wrong. It gives us that basic gut feeling about fairness, empathy.
But it's always a but, isn't there?
Uh-huh. The source argues you can't just rely on fitra. It asks, is it enough on its own? And the answer it gives is no.
Why not?
Because it argues your environment, your upbringing, society, all of these things can twist it, change, and even corrupt it. It's not foolproof.
Does it give an example?
It does. It cites a hadith, a saying from the Holy Prophet, stating that every baby is born with this fitra, this natural inclination towards good. Okay, but then society or parents can steer them differently, change that original setting, so to speak.
I see. And it makes this concrete somehow.
Yes, with a pretty stark historical example. It talks about some pre-Islamic tribes.
And how about them?
They practiced burying female infants alive. Now, you'd think conscience would scream against that, right?
You would hope so, definitely.
But the source argues in that specific cultural context, their conscience didn't necessarily stop them. Worse, It suggests some might have even seen it as their right thing to do, maybe even felt relieved doing it because they considered female children a source of shame or an economic burden.
Wow, so the conscience itself was warped.
That's the source's point. It shows that conscience isn't this fixed, reliable moral guide. It can be heavily influenced, even reversed. So the conclusion drawn is fitra alone, not enough, not dependable.
Okay, so if the inner compass isn't reliable enough on its own, what about looking outward to society? Some people definitely argue society sets the rules, right?
That's the next candidate the source examines. Can society be our moral foundation?
And the verdict is?
Again, the source argues no. And the reason is similar. Society isn't fixed. It's always changing, sometimes radically.
Things that were okay 50 years ago aren't now, and vice versa.
Precisely. The source says, how can you base your fundamental values on something that's constantly shifting? It points back to that example of the tribes burying infants.
Right. That was considered acceptable, maybe even necessary by that society.
Exactly. And then it uses a more modern example, attitudes towards homosexuality in the U.S.
Okay.
It notes how, not that long ago, until the early 70s, it was classified as a psychological disorder, highly stigmatized, and now societal acceptance is widespread in many places. So the source asks, which version of society was right? The one 100 years ago or the one today?
The inconsistency makes it unreliable as a foundation.
That's the argument. It uses an analogy to make it clearer. Think about money, like, say, the dollar. If its value wasn't stable, if today it buys you a car, but tomorrow it barely buys you a pencil, would it have any real dependable worth?
No, of course not. You couldn't trust it.
Right. Stability gives value you can rely on, the source argues. Moral principles need that same kind of stability to be truly valuable and dependable.
So because societal views change, they can't provide that stable foundation.
That's the conclusion. The source wraps this section up by saying that people relying just on their own conscience, which can be worked, or on society, which constantly changes, they lack a firm footing.
Exactly. They lack a firm foundation. And therefore, according to this source's logic, their actions, even if they look good outwardly, ultimately lack deep value because they aren't grounded in something stable and unchanging.
It even mentions a Qur'anic verse here.
Yes, Surah Al-Furqan, verse 23. The source interprets it as saying that on the day of judgment, the deeds of those without this firm foundation will be like scattered dust, weightless, without credit.
Okay, so if conscience and society are out as reliable foundations, according to this source,
Yeah.
that leads us to the proposed alternative, which is religion. Right. So what is it about religion, in this view, that provides the stability conscience and society lack?
The key difference, the source argues, is that religion doesn't base good on just a feeling or a current trend.
It's not subjective in the same way.
No. Instead, it claims religion provides a system of fixed rights, unchanging principles.
What kind of rights are we talking about?
It details this, focusing specifically on Islam as an example. It talks about the rights of other people, the rights within a family, rights concerning the environment, and significantly, the rights owed to the Creator.
And the core idea is that these rights are fixed, set in stone.
That's the claim. They don't change with the times or with cultural shifts, unlike societal norms or potentially corrupted conscience. It's this fixed nature, the source contends, that makes religion a uniquely dependable and trustworthy foundation for morality.
So the advantage is knowing there's a clear, stable set of rules or rights you have to observe.
Yes, a dependable system of values. The source presents this as the system God wants for human beings, something reliable.
Okay, that's a strong argument for religion as a foundation. But the source must know there's a huge objection coming, right?
Right, absolutely. It anticipates it directly. The common charge, often from atheists or
Secular thinkers.
is that if religion is so great, Why does it seem to be behind so much conflict, war, and bloodshed throughout history?
Exactly. The religion is the problem argument. The source tackles this with a few counterarguments.
What's the first one?
First, it challenges the historical premise itself. It argues that actually the majority of wars and the worst atrocities in history weren't primarily driven by religion.
Really?
It gives examples.
It does. It points to the massive death tolls under 20th century atheistic regimes like communism, arguing those were ideological, not religious conflicts.
And it brings up World War II, 50 to 70 million deaths. It emphasizes Hitler had a political agenda, not a religious one. The war wasn't fought for religion.
So the source calls the idea that religion is the main source of conflict a historical misconception.
Interesting. What's the second counterargument?
This one focuses on the abuse of religion. It kind of turns the argument around.
How so?
It asks, okay, when people blame religion, which religion? But more importantly, it argues that things are abused because they have real power and influence.
Like the counterfeiting analogy it used earlier.
Exactly like that. You only counterfeit something valuable, like a $20 bill. You don't fake something worthless or non-existent.
So the fact that religion is abused actually points to its significance and power.
That's
in
the
the
source's
world.
interpretation. People try to misuse it precisely because it holds sway over people's lives and societies. The abuse paradoxically proves its reality.
Okay. And the third point against the religion is the problem idea.
This one's broader. It points the finger at basic human nature.
Meaning?
The source makes a sweeping claim. Human beings tend to abuse everything.
Everything.
It challenges you, the listener. Can you think of anything humans haven't misused? Social relationships, natural resources, political power, money, the list goes on.
That's a fair point.
Sadly, it references a concept from the Qur'an, al-nafs al-amma, the evil inciting soul, suggesting there's a part of human nature that drives us to corrupt or misuse the good things we have.
So religion is just another one of those things that falls prey to this human tendency?
Exactly. From this perspective, the abuse of religion isn't a flaw in religion itself, but a result of this flawed aspect of human nature. It's not that religion is bad, it's that humans misuse it just like they misuse everything else.
Okay, so after defending religion against that major criticism, does the source then talk about the positives, its contributions?
Yes, it definitely shifts gears to highlight what it sees as religion's positive impact on history and civilization.
What kind of contributions does it mention?
It makes a bold claim that most major historical achievements can actually be traced back to what it calls true religions, and it puts Islam specifically at the forefront of these positive influences.
Does it give concrete examples? That's a big claim.
It offers a few. It mentions Thomas Jefferson owning a Qur'an, implying its ideas might have influenced early American thought.
Interesting link. What else?
It points to Mahatma Gandhi. It says he read the Qur'an while in prison and apparently drew moral and ideological inspiration from it for his philosophy of nonviolent resistance.
Okay. Connecting it to major figures and movements.
And then there's a specific mention of a study reportedly from George Washington University some years back.
What did the study supposedly find?
According to the source, this study found that several non-Muslim countries, it names Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Denmark, the UK, Canada, were actually implementing Quranic principles, especially economic and moral ones, better than many Muslim-majority nations.
Wow, that's quite a statement. What's the source's takeaway from that?
It suggests that the success and advancement of these Western countries might, perhaps unknowingly, stem from their alignment with some of these foundational religious principles that Muslim nations, it claims, have largely abandoned due to politics or other factors.
So it flips the script, suggesting adherence to these principles leads to success regardless of the nation's dominant religion.
That seems to be the implication drawn by the source. It also briefly mentions that many sciences trace origins back to early Islamic scholars like Imam Ali and Imam al-Sadiq.
Right. So tying it all together, the source
Concludes. It strongly concludes that it's wrong to blame religion for the world's problems. The real culprits, it argues, are things like politics and, more fundamentally, a lack of true religion or at least, a failure to implement its principles properly.
It suggests if religion had been properly followed, the world would be in better shape.
That's the final position presented. A world guided by these fixed divine principles would be a very different and better place.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the journey through this source's perspective.
We started with its main point, beliefs give actions value.
Then we looked at its critique of relying just on conscience or fitra because it can be corrupted, and its critique of relying on society because society's standards are always changing. Remember the currency analogy?
Right. Stability is key, which led to its argument for religion, providing that necessary fixed foundation through unchanging rights.
Then it tackled the big objection, religion causing problems, by arguing that's historically inaccurate, for the most part, that abuse points to religion's power, and that humans misuse everything anyway.
And it highlighted religion's claimed positive contributions, citing figures like Jefferson and Gandhi, and that interesting university study about implementing principles, all building towards the idea that the real problem isn't religion, but the lack of its proper application.
It really does center everything on that initial idea, the importance of having core beliefs based on something fixed, something dependable.
Which leaves us and you with a final thought drawn purely from the material we've discussed. If this source is right, if the most critical thing is basing your life and actions on a fixed, dependable foundation,
what does that imply about how you evaluate your own actions? And perhaps more importantly, where do you turn to define what's truly good and bad? It's definitely something to chew on.